Hello, it's James here again for an A2P for OCR revision session, particularly focused on the summer exam 2013, where recovery from exercise can be considered a hot topic, so one you really need to know because it's a real possibility for coming up in your exam. Now we're going to focus on two aspects of recovery. The first is the alactacid component and the second is the lactacid component of recovery. But to understand those, we have to first of all recognise the processes that take place when we exercise in relation to oxygen consumption. So we can see here on this dotted line, I'll just sort of go over it in red here, that at this point in our oxygen consumption curve, exercise begins or starts. And we have an increase in oxygen consumption. However, we can actually state that this area here is a quantity of oxygen which we would have used if it were available. In other words, if our systems, our aerobic systems, were sort of responsive and rapid enough to shoot up and to produce or to allow us to consume oxygen at this level, we would do that. Unfortunately, we can't. We respond a little bit slower to that. So we call this a deficit. So it's a quantity of oxygen which would have been used if it were available, and we call it an O2 deficit. Now, because the oxygen wasn't available, of course, what we're assuming is that we are powering exercise in that period, or that quantity of exercise, highlighted in green, but we have to, of course, do it anaerobically because we didn't have this oxygen available, which means, because it's anaerobic work, that we have to recover from that anaerobic work. And the period we cover is when intensity of exercise decreases, or indeed when exercise ends. So what we end up with is a period here that we describe or we label as Epoch, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. This area here essentially recovers the anaerobic work that was done in our green O2 deficit period. So the anaerobic work we have to do at the start of exercise, or indeed at the increase in intensity within exercise, we have to recover from that aerobically in the processes of Epoch, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And the last thing to say before we look at this in detail is that you might see sort of two distinct parts of our epoch. We have one part here, which is kind of like a steep decline. You can see the curve here declining steeply. And then we have another part here, which is a gradual levelling off in this area there of oxygen consumption. In fact, we're actually going through two sets of processes within those two time periods. So first of all, very simple, we call this in blue the fast component of epoch. We also call it the alactacid det, but try and use fast component if you can. And we call this purple area down here predictably the slow component, which I'm going to struggle to fit in on the end of the screen here, but you get the idea. Slow component of epoch. And we're going to have a look at what processes are taking place in each of those zones. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of zoom in to these zones. So I'll just do it a bit like this. Look, there we go. We see them nicely on that side. Just bear with me a second. Just zoom out, yeah. So I've just zoomed in again. I'll just drag this over. Clearly there's a bit of space. So first of all, let's have a think about what is happening in this fast component. So we'll go in blue, just to make sure that's obvious, but the fast component up here. And what we're going to say here is that there are a number of physiological processes actually taking place. So let's go through what they are. Well, first of all, we call the fast component, as I said before, keep shifting this accidentally here, the alactacid component. So make sure the alactacid det, sometimes we refer to it as, so make sure you understand it's the alactacid det. And by alactacid det, we mean the non-lactic acid det in there. Now what we do here is we restore muscle ATP and PC. So we restore muscle ATP and PC stores. Of course, PC have been utilised within the ATP PC system. And the energy, of course, from these original reactions is reversible, or we call it endothermic. So this process actually takes in heat while we are achieving it. We do this by breaking down fats and glycogen aerobically. So this is an aerobic process. So in the presence of oxygen, we restore ATP and PC endothermically. And we also say that in terms of time phasing, we say that this whole process takes 2 to 3 minutes. However, we can also say that 50% recovery of PC is achieved in 30 seconds. Now that's important when you think about recovery periods in interval training or in resistance training, for example. We probably want to give a minimum of 30 seconds to restore 50% of our PC stores. And that this process utilises approximately, let me put it in here, 4 litres. Utilises 4 litres of oxygen. So that's how much for the average person oxygen which we must consume within this period. And the final thing is to say that we also resaturate myoglobin. So that oxygen store within the muscle is also resaturated. So these will be the points that will get us marks when we are describing this fast component of Epoch here post-exercise. And what then about the slow component of Epoch? This zone here, which takes a little bit longer, hence the slow component, or we might refer to as the lactacid component. I've given up, by the way, on the zooming. That went rather badly, as you probably noticed. So lesson learned there. But the lactacid component of Epoch is also the other name for the slow component. Well, the main job, of course, because of the lactacid component, is the removal of lactic acid. That's it. But always going to get your mark when describing the slow component, the removal of lactic acid. And we need to know where that lactic acid goes. First of all, we argue that we convert lactic acid to a substrate called pyruvate, which you probably know quite well from studying the lactic acid and aerobic pathways. Once that's achieved, that lactic acid, now pyruvate, can then be oxidized. So we get credit for saying that that lactic acid is passed through the Krebs cycle or the Corey cycle and is metabolized or oxidized, of course, aerobically. And as a result of that, we break this product down into CO2 and water. So we actually remove lactic acid ultimately in the form of CO2 and water. And we actually say that we have about 60% of our lactic acid which is actually metabolized aerobically, so actually used as a fuel. But the remaining percentage, the majority of the remaining percentage, is converted back to glycogen and stored in the liver, or it could be in the muscle. And that's called glyconeogenesis, that process. That's not going to get us a mark, but just in case you're interested. And a small proportion of that also remains as blood glucose. And we also have our final sort of part of this lactic acid, which is converted to protein. And this protein is in the form of a product called urea. And we can actually sweat that out to get rid of it. We can also pass it when we go to the toilet as well. So this process takes approximately 1 hour, but it can take longer for particularly heavy bouts of exercise. And for this element, we consume about 5 to 8 litres of O2. So we must be able to identify and make these points when describing the slow component of Epoch. These will be the points that get you the marks. I hope it's been useful for you. Apologies for trying that Zoom technique earlier. It went horribly badly, as you could probably notice, but I hope the revision session is useful to you nevertheless. Remember, this is a hot topic for summer exam 2013. Good luck with the revision. Bye-bye.